Welcome to the What If It's Not Depression podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Achina Stein. Today, we are going to be talking about electromagnetic fields. And this is really going to be a great interview because we're going to be presenting the science about all of this and have a great expert on the field, and that is Cece Doucette. Cece Doucette is the director of Massachusetts for Safe Technology and works with health care practitioners, schools, communities, municipalities, and legislatures to address wireless radiation and public health. She is also Education Services Director with the international nonprofit Safer Tech Education, offering affordable 30-minute online trainings for schools, families, and companies. So please look into that and get your school on board, your school system on board. She's an amazing source of information. She's helped her school become the first in the nation to adopt best practices for mobile devices, worked with legislatures in New Hampshire to pass the first law to investigate wireless harms, and is chaperoning 6 bills in Massachusetts. Cece was honored to co-chair the technology panel for the NIH Health and Buildings Roundtable Conference and present state and local policy at the EMF Medical Conference. She has been featured in the films Generation Zapped, Wi-Fi Refugees, and 5G Friend or Foe. Welcome, Cece.
Oh, thank you so much for that kind introduction. It's such an honor to see you again and to be here with your audience.
Oh, thanks for being with us and taking the time out of your busy day. Really happy to have you on and talking about especially the science, because there's a lot of people who talk about wireless risks, but they don't really know the science, and obviously they may not necessarily be as convincing. And I think you're quite convincing, and I really want to drill down on that. But I know that you spent 8 years bringing wireless technology into your children's schools. I know you spent 8 years bringing wireless technology into your children's schools, but then an electrical engineer friend tipped you off that it is biologically hazardous, right?
Yeah, so we're a little town in Ashland, Massachusetts, and our budgets had been cut to the bone year after year. And I stepped up and offered to lead our local education foundation. And that was right at the time that the industry was heavily promoting their 21st century classroom. So we thought we had to get all this equipment, and we had no funding. So, good doobie parents, we raised our hands and started doing campaign after campaign to get the wireless infrastructure, to get the iPads and the Chromebooks, and the smart boards and the minis, and what we thought was going to give our kids a leg up. And then my girlfriend, Wendy, the engineer, tipped us off literally that there are biological effects. And it was at book group one night, and I just kind of made a mental note of it and didn't do much. And then not long after that, I had seen that the American Academy of Environmental Medicine, these are the doctors who get the conundrum cases that regular doctors haven't been trained on. And I know as a functional medicine practitioner, you also get a lot of people at wit's end who have tried everything and they don't know what's causing them to be so sick. Oftentimes it is these environmental exposures. And so the American Academy of Environmental Medicine put out a position statement to school superintendents back in 2012, recommending that we do not allow wireless technology into our schools. So when I read that, I went, wow, where's the science on this, right? So I, like you, prefer to really go out and do my own investigation and look at the facts. And I was just shocked that you don't even have to look very far. You just need to know to look. And there are literally thousands of peer-reviewed, published studies from all over the world showing extensive biological harm. I can give you a quick rundown of what the science indicates. And anybody who's listening with this, you're more than welcome to go to my website at Massachusetts for Safe Technology. And if you go to my resources page, you'll be able to access the science right from there. So in the long term, we now know that this causes cancer and DNA damage. And for many years, the industry would spin it like, oh, you know, we need more science. Well, our government here in the United States concluded a $30 million study on cell phone harms. It took them 2 decades, and they brought in world-leading experts whose life's work is investigating what we call radio frequency radiation. It's actually two-way microwave radiation that sends our signals and data back and forth when we're not connected through wires anymore. So our government, through the National Toxicology Program, determined clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage. Now, clear evidence is the highest of 5 categories. And this is with arguably the world's leading toxics research, the NTP, National Toxicology Program, highest ranking of clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage. Well, when that study came out, what did the industry do? They said, oh, that's just one study. You need to have more than one study. Well, right on the heels of our cell phone study, the Ramazzini Institute in Italy completed another multi-million-dollar study on cell tower base stations. And guess what they found? Clear evidence of cancers and DNA damage, you know, cancers in the Schwann cells around the heart. There was evidence for brain tumors. There was some evidence for, you know, acoustic neuromas, and it just goes on and on. But we don't hear about it in mainstream media because it's by and large owned by the same 4 to 6 corporations now. We used to have like 50 mainstream media outlets, and they've been bought up and bought up and bought up. And now these same 4 to 6 conglomerations really control the messaging that comes out through mainstream media. So they're not going to report on these wonderful studies that are being done. So it's really up to us to keep learning. So we know about cancers. It was the infertility studies that got me on my feet. They've taken male human sperm and exposed it to a laptop with the antennas radiating. Those antennas, and you know, it all sounds like science fiction, but we opened up my television set. I picked up my big TV, I put it in my car, and I took it down to the local IT guy. And I said, there's nothing in my settings that'll allow me to turn off the wireless connection. Can you please just take it out? And this is what it was. It's not rocket science. It's a little board that's plugged into all of our devices, right? You remove that, you remove the radiation. So, but what they found in those sperm studies is that it changed the DNA by radiating from a laptop. It slowed the motility of the sperm, and it caused programmed cell death or apoptosis, which to me, to you, that makes sense. To me, it means it was killing the cells. It was killing the sperm. In 4 hours of exposure. And I went, you've got to be kidding me. We had just sent my oldest daughter up to college, and what did she do? She took her MacBook, which she used right on her lap. Our youngest had just gone into high school, and we thought we'd give her a leg up, so we bought her a laptop for Christmas. And where was she using it? But right on top of her reproductive organs. And Kaiser Permanente has done another really good study on women's reproductive health, and they have shown, and this study wasn't even questioned. It was really good. But Kaiser Permanente's scientists proved that women who are using wireless technology are having higher miscarriage rates. So it's hitting the fertility on both sides. So we know about cancers, we know about DNA damage, we know about infertility. And then I know that you and your listeners are especially focused on neurological impacts. And I want to share some of that with you too. So Dr. Hugh Taylor heads up OB/GYN at Yale Medical. And Dr. Taylor has done some of the rodent studies. And so they exposed pregnant mice to the radiation from a cell phone for a certain number of hours a day. And when the mice gave birth to their pups, the pups, as they got a little bit bigger, started exhibiting behavior much like a child with ADD or attention hypersensitivity deficit disorder. Bouncing off the walls of the cage, not a care in the world, the attention just wasn't there. So we know it is a neurotoxin. Dr. Martha Herbert, who founded the autism lab here at Massachusetts General Hospital, she has studied this extensively, and she sees huge connections between the families that were in her care and what we know scientifically happens to the brain when you get to that tipping point where your body just can't handle all these exposures. And then you fall off and you start getting neurotoxicity of all different kinds. Dr. Martin Pall, Pall, and I just wanted to mention, Dr. Martha Herbert is a Harvard pediatric neurologist. So the credentials are just top notch. Dr. Martin Pall culled the science on neurotoxicity, and he's done a really good paper on depression and neurodegeneration. And again, if you go out to my website, Massachusetts for Safe Technology, on the resources page, you can pull up the link for the neurotoxicity. So we know this causes anxiety. This causes depression. This causes a leakage in the blood-brain barrier, which is a beautiful membrane that protects our sensitive areas like the brain. And it's, during our sleep, we have all these amazing mechanisms that help us to do cell repair and cleanup. And after the cleanup, it's got to be escorted out through the blood and cleared out of the body. Well, when you pulsate the brain with microwaves or radio frequency radiation, Dr. Pal Patcher and other scientists saw that it opened up the blood-brain barrier. So now instead of escorting these toxins out of the body, they can take a turn into the brain. And so we start seeing pollutants coming into the brain like we have never seen before. Even pre-pandemic, that we were already at epidemic levels of anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, not only with adults, but children like we have never seen before. So And we know we need to pay attention to the glyphosate in our foods. We need to be choosing organic as often as we can. We need to watch out for the neonicotinoids that are taking out our pollinators. But there's an additional full body of science on what this radiation is doing to the environment, let alone to humans. But I wanted to say something that might help people today. And that is, let's think about doing our very best to create a sleep sanctuary. So can I give a little demonstration right now?
Oh, absolutely. I was going to ask you, I was hoping you were going to give a demonstration. I've seen your demonstration, and I think it's really important for people to honestly see it with their own eyes. And
because I couldn't get my head around this invisible exposure. And if COVID taught us anything, we need to be pretty on top of invisible exposures in our environment, right? So one of the big gaps we had when I fell down the rabbit hole back in 2012, maybe, is that we could tell people were getting very sick. Their doctors had never been trained, so they're getting misdiagnosed, and then they continue to suffer. So we're so grateful now that we have an EMF medical conference. Originally, it was accredited for 24.5 continuing education credits for doctors. There was also a CME track or the same training, but nurses could also get, well, the crediting period has expired. So we have taken this entire conference and put it online where you, all your colleagues, and all your patients can just start scheduling things into your calendar. Oh, look, here's a 20-minute lecture I might want to go to. Here's a half hour. Here's an hour. So the entire medical conference is now available at no charge. And that's on my resources page too. But what I wanted to say is that this is the device that was introduced at the EMF medical conference, and healthcare practitioners are now paying $400 to get this safe and sound Pro 2 broadband meter, bring it into their practice, and then loan it out to their patients to go home and do a scavenger hunt. What is radiating in your home? Write it down and then come back, and then the healthcare team can help you to mitigate. So I didn't want to know this. I didn't want to believe any of this, but I finally stopped circling my tail after a few months and went, you're the mom, step up and protect your family. So I got myself a meter and I remediated everything in my home. So when I turn this on, I've done all the work. I don't have high levels of radio frequency in my home. So this is flashing green, and that's the best that we can get. It's hard to see here, but the maximum spike of microwave radiation that the science tells us, first of all, let's not kid ourselves. There's no safe level of man-made radiation. None. So let's do our best to get to what the Centers for Disease Control calls the ALARA principle, as low as reasonably achievable.
Right.
So we don't want to be crazy people, but let's learn and just do our best. So in my house, the maximum spike of radiation is at 1.75. In the scientific literature, they want us to be at 10 or less. And the unit of measurement is something called a microwatt per square meter. So basically in, 3 feet of air, how much radiation's coming through. And I still do get a little bit off of our digital utility meters, but they're on the other side of the house. I might get a little bleed through from my neighbors' routers and stuff, but I feel pretty safe in my house when I'm down to 1.75.
Can I ask you a question? So when you get that bleed through, or you're, by your neighbors, how much does it spike up beyond the maximum?
Safe levels?
Yeah.
Well, I am really blessed because I'm in a single family home. So I can pretty much control what my exposures are. But I, for example, just this week was contacted by a senior citizen in Concord, Massachusetts, who lives in a retirement community, senior housing, and she's on the first floor, and they just put in a bank of smart meters for one of her utilities, and she's getting sicker and sicker. So it's a whole nother conversation on how do you remediate all those, plus what's bleeding in, because this pulses through floors, windows, ceilings, walls. That's how it's reaching your cell phone indoors. It's just coming straight through.
Right.
So I'm going to take my cell phone out of airplane mode and just give a live demonstration of what happens when we expose ourselves to microwave radiation. So we're not even doing anything. But I'm going to go back into airplane mode real quick so I don't radiate myself. So notice it starts to dissipate, and after a few seconds.
Yeah. Because your screen, Cece, because you have a background screen, you have to show it right in front of you, because
right in front of me.
Get blurred out. Yeah. It's kind of, yeah, there you go.
That's a great tip. Thank you. So I turned on that one device, but that one device has multiple antennas. So my cell phone has cellular and data. And again, remember I showed you this little antenna. Well, they're even smaller inside of our phones, but there's one in there for cellular and data. There's a separate antenna for Bluetooth. There's a separate antenna for locator, for hotspot, for Wi-Fi. And for most folks today who didn't know any better and got talked into upgrading to a 5G phone, there's another array of antennas in there. And each one is separately pulsing these microwaves to make or maintain a handshake with the nearest cell tower or router. And again, the message is not no technology, it's safe technology. Once we know we've got all these different antennas, why wouldn't we go into settings and just turn them all off?
Right.
And then only turn on the one that you need.
Right.
Only the one you need, and for as short a time as you can get away with. So I want to tell you.
Yeah. Would you mind if you don't mind, just demonstrating it again? Because I think because it blurred out, it was hard to see the change on the.
Okay. So I will redo that. So I just reset my meter. We're back down into blinking green again. And I'm going to turn my cell phone on. I'm taking it out of airplane mode.
Yeah.
And we've got audio on this as well that tells us kind of what some of these different signals are.
And what did it
So,
skyrocket? What's the number that it went up to?
okay, yeah, let me turn this down first of all, because I apologize, that's really annoying. So I'm gonna go ahead and go back into airplane mode. Okay. And if you have an iPhone, when you go into airplane mode, go look at your settings and make sure that your Bluetooth and your Wi-Fi both say off. If they're either on or say not connected, that means it's still going, hello, here I am. I want to connect with you. And that's pulsing radiation. So
Okay.
we were at
Good tip.
1.75 microwatts per square meter. Just turning on that one cell phone, we shot up to 2,170,000.
Holy cow.
Million, and the science wants us to be at 10 or less, not 10,000, but 10
Wow.
microwatts per square meter or
They went up to
less.
2 million.
2,130,000.
Wow. And that's just with a cell phone. If you're in front of a laptop and you have, oh my gosh.
Yeah, and you've got a cordless mouse, a cordless keyboard, you've
Right.
got a wearable on your wrist, you've got a wireless home security system. So what the industry is pushing now is 5G and the Internet of Things, and they're forecasting that if they're successful, you and I and everybody else will have 200 wireless devices talking to the internet
Right.
with microwave radio frequency radiation.
Right.
So
Yeah,
it
it's
sounds pretty
amazing.
glum,
Yeah,
but the good news is that once we learn, and I know we'll have limited minutes here with your program today, but everybody, please know, I do 2 free public education webinars every month. If you go to the events page at Massachusetts for Safe Technology, join us live if you can. We do a 2-hour webinar, and at the end, we do questions and answers. So we can answer your silly questions, your burning questions, whatever. We just want to help you learn. If the time doesn't work out though, and you can't join us live, just register, and then I'll send you my slides that's chock-a-block full of links so you can dive into whatever interests you most, and we'll send you the recording. So
That's
we just want to
awesome.
help you learn.
Oh, that's really awesome. So can you back up a little bit and maybe talk about the mechanism of harm? I think it would be really helpful for people to really understand what is actually happening to your cells. You did mention micro, like I'm kind of imagining putting ourselves in a microwave oven, essentially, like what is, we know what that does to our food, right? Is that what's happening in our brain?
A little bit. So I'll talk you through some of the mechanisms of harm. One has to do with that blood-brain barrier that we talked about. So now we're allowing toxins to get where they've never been before. Another has to do with sleep. So, and I'm not a doctor or a scientist, but I know that we have a brain, and I know the brain releases melatonin through the pineal gland while we're in the wee hours of darkness. So you and I are light beings. We operate off of the circadian rhythm, light and dark, 24-hour period. And in that wee hour of darkness, the pineal gland releases the melatonin to regulate our sleep and to help to escort the toxins out of the body. When we don't know any better and we choose to leave this man-made light energy form of microwaves pulsating at us all night long, the brain's over there going, when's it going to get dark so I can release that melatonin? So the brain can't differentiate between natural daylight and man-made radio frequency radiation pulsations. So that's one mechanism of harm, and that we can fix. So again, the message is not no technology. If you use your cell phone as your alarm clock, turn off all those antennas and measure if you can to make sure you got them all. But everything that's on your device is there to use. Your clock, your alarm, your camera, anything you've downloaded is there to use. Little screens are hard on the eyes. We have an epidemic of myopia happening right now, even among
Right.
children, which is misshaping the eyeball because we're meant to be scanning the horizon.
Right.
That's our survival instinct. And when we spend hour upon hour at this short distance, it's literally changing our eyeballs. So
Wow.
that's another mechanism of harm to do with the screen use, not necessarily the radiation,
Right.
but a very, very important mechanism of harm has to do with rouleau formation. So what is rouleau formation? In my little brain, it sounds like the candy Rolos. You know how those chocolate caramels stack up,
Right,
right?
right. It's a cooking
Um,
term.
so what the scientists will tell us is that our red blood cells are meant to be free floating and bringing oxygen to all of our important organs, our skin, everything. What happens when we expose our red blood cells to electromagnetic fields? Well, they start to magnetize. And Dr. Magda Havas is a professor emeritus from Trent University up in Canada. And she had done studies on this. And when you look under a high-powered microscope at the blood cells before and after exposure, you see the nice red blood cells floating around doing their job, bringing oxygen. And then when you expose them, just even for a short time, to microwaves, these smooth edges start looking like bottle caps on the red blood cells, and then they start glomming together. So now you've got these clumps of red blood cells that can't get to where they need to go to bring that ever critical oxygen to our everything.
Right.
So reactive oxygen species, oxidative stress, which as a doctor, you'll tell your patients, it's often the precursor to chronic illnesses, right?
Right.
So
Absolutely.
we
Yeah.
know, oh, and here's another fun mechanism of harm. So just like the birds and the bees all have these functions built into them, like magnetite in the beaks and stuff to help them navigate with the Earth's electromagnetic field and get to where they need to go. It turns out we have little antennas in the surface of our skin. And when we overpower those, you know, they're meant to tell us, hey, it's too hot out there. You need to go cool your system, or it's too cold. You better cover up, right? These pulsations of microwaves are dysregulating our own mechanism for navigating around in our world. So some people will talk about, oh, gee, you know, yeah, I get that hot ear when I put the
Right.
cell phone up here, or my face or my children's face. We've been getting these funky rashes and flushes. And then there's the nerve damage. So there's a guy in Framingham, Chuck. He's a graphic artist, and he was so great to design my logo for Massachusetts for Safe Technology. And the reason we connected is he figured out that there was something jiggity going on in his leg with the nerves. And he went to his doctors, they ran the tests, they came up empty. So Chuck starts doing his own research and he discovers neurotoxicity. And where does Chuck keep his cell phone all day? But right in his pants pocket. So Chuck removes the cell phone, he hardwires his house, and his leg is fine today.
Oh, wow.
So
Wow.
some effects can be reversed just by cleaning up the electropollution in your environment. My daughter's headaches, nosebleeds, all but gone unless she lets herself get dehydrated. What child in high school should be having a migraine?
Right.
Right?
Right.
So we do our best to create the sleep sanctuary, which is our home. And as intimidating as it sounds, it's really not rocket science, you guys. On the back of your router, pick it up, look at it. You're going to see Ethernet ports. All you got to do is plug Ethernet cables back in. Right? And who knew on the other end of the Ethernet cable, you can buy like a little dongle or a little adapter. This is one for the iPhone. 30 bucks. It's a lightning adapter. And then you plug it into your device, right? You plug it in, and then you're hardwired. All that means is you put a wire back to get your connectivity. So all of our homes have the internet coming through big fat cables underground, hooking up to that router in our
Right.
home.
Right.
And then all we have to do is fix the connection from the router to our devices. So we know that most of us have more than one device.
Right.
And so all you have to do is get something called an Ethernet switch. This
Mhm.
one, you would plug, the one cable from your router into here. And then you would get other little Ethernet cables and plug in your devices and get whatever little adapters you need. And
Mhm.
each one gets a direct connection to the internet. So you're not competing for bandwidth anymore. So hardwired technology beats wireless on everything from safety to energy conservation. It uses 10 times more energy with these wireless systems.
You're right
And
about
there was a
that. Yeah.
it's horrible. There was a Greenpeace analyst a decade or more ago who crunched the numbers and said, if the cloud were a country, it would be the fifth largest consumer of energy in the world.
Mm.
But we've never been given a balance of information.
Right.
So hardwiring better protects your privacy, your security, your energy consumption. It's far more sustainable, but nobody knows. We all
Right.
just jumped on the bandwagon when they gave us all these bells and whistles.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah,
folks, as scary as it sounds to make a mind shift, you can fix this. You probably have
absolutely.
a box of wires kicking around your basement somewhere, right?
Absolutely. I know we definitely have wires in our basement. You mentioned that we are beings of light, which is true. It's really important to really support the circadian rhythm in the bodies and other rhythms as well. I talk about that all the time. But one thing that people don't quite realize is that we're electrical beings. That's why we can do EKGs and EEGs. And it's why we can get electrocuted. If you have a flooded basement, you want to make sure you go down in rubber boots so you don't get electrocuted.
Right.
People don't realize how we can get electrocuted or
Mhm.
electrified, and so we will absolutely respond to things that are electrical in nature, and radiation is a form of electricity, so to speak.
It is, and our cells whisper to each other with these electrical signals all the time.
Right.
And when we overpower our signals, I was presenting to our form of government, which is a select board here in Ashland. And one of the women just didn't want to believe it. She says, what you're describing, it's like everything. And I said, we are bioelectrical chemical beings.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you overpower us with something, it's going to start hitting where your weakest proclivity is. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
it's your brain, maybe it's your breast, and you're going to wind up with breast cancer. Maybe it's your colon, and you're going to wind up with leaky gut. It's going to disrupt the mast cells of the gut. So yeah, it sounds crazy. It sounds like science fiction, but once you look at the peer-reviewed, independent, and I underscore independent, because we know with the big tobacco playbook, these industries will do their own studies under pre-calculated conditions that will show no harm.
Right.
But we also need to know no harm is never the same thing as safe.
Right. Exactly.
So,
Yes.
and the peer-reviewed independent science is there by the barrel full. We just need to know to go look at it.
Right. Right. And there's going to be more vulnerable population. So people are probably
Mhm.
saying, well, I'm not affected by it. And I sleep right next to a smart
Meter. Yeah.
meter bank of it's right next to my apartment. But there are people who are more vulnerable and sort of like the canary in the coal mine kind of thing. So it's
Yeah.
it's really
Oh,
important.
I love that you said that. We have a wonderful production company here in Massachusetts called PT Theater Company.
Mhm.
And it's a husband and wife, and she became very electrosensitive. And they have come out with a performance called Canary in the Gold Mine, because they're the ones trying to alert people. It's a really good production.
Mhm.
But as far as exposures and vulnerable populations go, first of all, we are very individual biologically, right? So one
Mhm.
body system will respond differently from somebody else. But when we become electromagnetically sensitized, it comes usually through two different ways. One, we get a massive exposure, like a cell tower shows up in front of your house and within a couple of weeks, or they put these smart meters on your home. You haven't changed, but something in the environment changed. So a massive new exposure can take you down, or it's also cumulative with dose.
Mm-hmm.
So the longer we choose to expose ourselves to radio frequency radiation, the greater the likelihood that if you're feeling just peachy today, tomorrow could be the day you hit that tipping point.
Right.
And people who are especially vulnerable, one, the elderly, because as we age, our cognitive abilities naturally begin a slow decline.
Mm-hmm.
But we know that this hits the elderly especially hard because we don't have quite the immune system we did when we were younger. We know that anybody with an existing health condition, your body is already fighting as hard as it can. So, one of the scientists, Dr. Andrew Goldworthy over in the UK, said one of the secrets the industry doesn't want to let out is that we have a finite amount of energy to work with.
Mm-hmm.
So if our body's already on a path to try to heal us, and now we are bombarding ourselves with all these microwaves, our immune system is going to run out of gas.
Mm-hmm.
So if you already have an existing health compromise, that makes us a vulnerable population. And then there are children. So with great thanks to Dr. Om Gandhi and his colleagues, they have done some modeling. What happens when you put a cell phone up to the head of an adult? Well,
Mm-hmm.
you and I have a fully formed skull.
Right.
That microwave radiation penetrates into our brain about a third of the way.
Mm-hmm.
When you put that same cell phone up to the head of a 10-year-old child, it permeates the brain about 2/3 of the way through.
Mm-hmm.
When you put that same cell phone up to the head of a 5-year-old child, it is pulsating microwaves through almost the entire brain.
Right. Mm.
So children, as we know, their skulls are not fully developed, they're thinner, and they also have a higher water content. And we know what happens when we put our coffee in the microwave oven, right? It starts doing this friction thing to heat up your
Right.
liquids.
Mm.
Well, guess what it's doing to the liquids in our brain and our children who have a higher water content.
Right.
And then there are pregnant women and fetuses who are vulnerable populations because the fetus is doing that most rapid cell proliferation.
Mm-hmm.
And the science is showing that this damages DNA.
Mm-hmm.
So if we are damaging the roadmap to grow a proper human or a proper plant or animal or biome of any kind, we can expect that we're not going to have the same outcomes that we had before we started radiating our society. And pregnant women's immune systems are already suppressed a little bit to give what she's got to the baby as well. So pregnant women, fetuses, children, the elderly, and anybody with an existing health compromise. And that can include people who have suffered an electromagnet or an electrical injury, like getting shocked or getting struck by lightning.
Right.
Those folks are often, and I just met a woman this week with hydrocephalus, and she had an injury at birth. And so she has more water on her brain, and that made her very vulnerable. And now she's so electrically sensitive that she can barely get out into society today.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there are people who have electrosensitive it's EHS,
Electro hypersensitivity.
sensitive,
Yeah.
yeah, electro hypersensitivity syndrome. I had a patient who is actually on disability for that, and it's really,
Yeah.
it's definitely exists. And I was shocked to learn that she actually got disability for that specifically. So, it's a known phenomenon, and I think people do need to pay attention. I really want to get to what people can do. I know you mentioned some things that they can do,
Mhm.
but you also have been, doing some grassroots advocacy, but and also have been doing some public policy. I would love for you to just touch on that real quick, and
Sure.
we can get into
Yeah. So when
solutions.
After we became the first in the nation to even have our little sign here in Ashland with best practices for mobile devices, turn things off when not in use, turn on the Wi-Fi only when you need it, and never ever put a device on your body. We became the first in the country to even have that little sign. Oh, can I just do a little sidebar and say why my schools did that sign?
Sure.
So anybody who's with us right now who has an iPhone, I invite you to take it out and go into settings. Okay? If folks have an Android or a Google phone or something, just look up RF exposure in your phone, but I know where it is in the iPhone. So go into settings and a little ways down, hit general. So settings, general, then go all the way down to the bottom and hit legal and regulatory. And about 4 down on the next menu with legal and regulatory, you see RF exposure, or radio frequency radiation that they politely call energy because it's a man-made energy. And in the first big paragraph at the bottom, it says, we tested this at a distance from the body. So if you're holding this with all those antennas radiating, you're exceeding the Federal Communication Commission's public radiation exposure limits. Those were set back in the 90s before we were completely surrounded by this electropollution. And the FCC has now been sued for ignoring 11,000 pages of evidence of harm entered into the public record. And the courts found them guilty and sent it back to the FCC to do better. It's been 3 years and they've done nothing. So there's no cavalry coming in, which is why I appreciate the opportunity to educate. But hey, these guys in the legal fine print, they're good guys, right? So in a subsequent paragraph, they say, to reduce your exposure to RF energy, basically don't touch something that's radiating. Common sense, right? Once we know, it says to use a hands-free option, such as the built-in speakerphone or the headphones or similar accessories. I want to say a few things about headphones. We know there's a big cool factor, especially with the kids, to have earbuds, right? So what are you doing? You're putting a microwave transmitter here, and you're putting a microwave transmitter here, and you've got a third device somewhere where it's communicating back and forth. So you're literally microwaving your brain with those earbuds. And if you use the headsets that came with phones once upon a time, it would be a wire that ran all the way right up to your brain. Well, one of the properties of this man-made radiation is it amplifies around metal. So if you've got your radiating device and you plug in a wire and then plug that wire into your head, the radiation's gonna be like, woohoo, party on, man. We're going right up that wire to your brain. So for everything we have managed to do wrong, we know how to do it right. So I would never, ever put a Bluetooth thing or an earbud up to my brain. If I ever had to use a mobile device that was active, I would only turn on the one antenna that I needed and reduce my exposure by turning off all the rest. And then I would use something called an air tube or a hollow tube headset. So at the bottom of it, you've got your little plug into your phone, and you can buy little adapters if you need a little adapter for your particular device. And it's got a nice long cord so you can set the radiating device far away from you. And then it's got the acoustics and the volume control and muting and stuff there. But then right up the wire, it's got these 2 little ferrite beads that stop the radiation. And from there, it's just a hollow tube or an air tube. You can have 2 of them to stick on your head. And there's no metal. So it's something like a doctor's stethoscope in mini form, right? You get to hear things really clearly. There's no metal here to draw the ambient radiation, let alone the radiation that would come off of a normal wire. So look for a hollow tube or an air tube headset. You can hook it over your ear so it stays stable while you're bopping around. But there's solutions for everything. There's so many good people working on this issue, but most folks are simply in the dark. They never knew that legal fine print was in there to cover the industry's backside. They never knew that they could just turn off all these added services that each have a separate antenna attached to it.
Right,
Turn off these antennas.
right.
So I got started, unbeknownst to me, we became the first in the United States to even have this little sign with best practices for mobile devices hanging in our classrooms. But I soon figured out it was just a sign, and our schools were waiting for higher authorities to tell them what to do. So I began presenting to the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. They have done nothing meaningful to inform and protect the public. And I went to Senator Karen Spilka, who is my legislator. She is now our Senate president, and she's a really good public servant. But she's up against these systems. She's up against the world's most powerful industries. So I've been educating. We had at one point more than 20 bills filed from different people popping up all over the state, talking to their legislators and filing legislation. This session, we have 6. One bill is a two are in consumer protection committee, and that would raise that legal fine print. Tell people it's there, form a commission, and get the right minds from around the state to sit at the table, look at the peer-reviewed science, and figure out what to do. So Senator Spilka introduced a commission bill for me back in 2014, 2015. And we've gotten it out of committee a few times, and people would congratulate me and say, that's amazing. Bills almost never make any movement the first time they're introduced in Massachusetts. So you should feel really good about that. But we never moved it all the way through the process to actually do something meaningfully to protect our kids today.
Right.
But lo and behold, we had the exact same conversation with a legislator in New Hampshire. He and his constituent, who got so sick from the Wi-Fi in her home that she almost died, they drove down from New Hampshire in his car. Representative Patrick Abrami, who's now running for Senate in New Hampshire, sat at my kitchen table, and we helped him to connect the dots. We showed him the legal fine print. We showed him the science. We measured the radiation and taught him a lot of other things. And he went back and beefed up this bill that says, why does that legal fine print even have to exist? Why do the major insurers like Lloyd's of London, Swiss Re, AM Best, why have they long since recognized this as a world-leading risk? And they have exclusions in their policy for electromagnetic fields of radiation. They won't cover for damages because they know there's an onslaught of lawsuits coming. Why does the FCC continue to ignore thousands of studies showing harm at the non-thermal? So right now, our government guidelines only account for how much heat would it take to raise the temperature of your skin. How much heat? So they've allowed these limits to be set way up here. You don't have to have heat. When you look at the non-thermal science on this, hundreds of thousands of times below here, we are seeing biological effects. So Rep. Abrami wrote this bill. We brought in leading world experts to testify, and in 7 months, we got that bill passed into law to form a commission to investigate. And even during the pandemic, they stuck to their 1-year deadline. Even when their government was shut down, they still managed to do their investigation in a year and came out with this groundbreaking report that is called the Final Report on Commission to Study the Environmental and Health Effects of Evolving 5G Technology, 5th generation technology. Once they started looking at it, they realized it's not just 5G, it's every single radiating device out there, every cell tower, every router, everything that we bought. But let's just learn, and they call out the conflicts of interest with the FDA, the FCC, other agencies, and the wireless industry. And then they make 15 recommendations to stop looking to wireless for primary connectivity. Put in setbacks so you can't put a cell tower or a 5G small cell right on somebody's property, right? Get the public educated, get our federal delegates back on this, because all the good programs we had way back when were defunded when the industry got in there and started capturing our federal agencies. So this is arguably our country's best document where industry wasn't able to torpedo it before they got through all the way to their conclusions. Now we keep trying to take their 15 recommendations and get new legislation to put those recommendations into law, and every time we get torpedoed by industry.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
but we keep trying.
Yeah, they'll fly someone from across the country to be at
Oh, they did.
yeah, they'll do
They
that.
flew a guy from the West Coast.
Yeah, I've been on multiple committees for multiple reasons in terms of health and safety in the state of Rhode Island, and it's amazing what they will do to
Yeah.
and it's a drop in the bucket for them, and they hire someone to come out, fly out 3 people, and
Right.
they'll say their points and maybe make huge donations and stuff like that for
Yeah.
whoever's on that committee, and then they vote against it.
That's right. There's a new film, a documentary that just came out this month. It's called The Digital Dilemma. Some people have already watched The Social Dilemma, which is all the guys who invented social media saying, step back, this is not healthy, it's not safe. Social media. And now this Digital Dilemma film that just came out of Europe talks about just that. There are so many scientists who get bought, and they have these amazing credentials, and they're getting up and taking the stand and saying whatever they're paid to say.
Right.
So they're kind of mercenary scientists for hire.
Yeah.
But there's also this other film called Generation Zapped. Get that. Generation Zapped. And it was part of the United Nations Film Festival, United Nations Association Film Festival. It won Best Documentary at the Women's Independent Film Festival and the DC Independent Film Festival. And a little bit of my work with the schools, our little sign here, is featured in the film. But more importantly, you'll hear directly from world-leading scientists and doctors and policymakers, not only the risks, but what we can do for safe technology. And it's done by a brilliant filmmaker, Sabine El-Jamal. She uses some humor. She's just so skilled at her craft. Yeah. So this is available widely now through streaming services. I know with my library card, I can go to Canopy or Hoopla, and those are the library streaming services, 74 minutes. This is my recommendation for next steps.
Awesome.
Sit down with your loved ones. Say, hey, I'm learning something about maybe some safety around all of our gadgets. How about we sit down and watch? 74 minutes, right? Yeah. It's really good. And folks will often hire me to come in and do a consultation, and I will co-host with them. We will do a Q&A at the end. And this came out publicly in 2018, Generation Zapped. And since then, I can bring people up to speed with what's happening in public policy, with the science, and all these amazing grassroots things that are happening. So, so many good resources. And that's why I do these 2 free public education webinars every month, because I can help you quickly connect the dots on what took me 10 plus years to come up to speed on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm so happy you're here and that you're even close by locally and doing all sorts of presentations, your website and the online programs that you're offering to educate people. I'm really grateful for you doing all of this education. We'll definitely have to do something locally in Rhode Island as well.
Bring me back. I
will.
I've been brought in to meet with the Rhode Island Department of Health. I've met with Senator Whitehouse. I've met with another legislator whose first name is Elaine, and I can't remember her last name right now. But her daughter had done a paper in college on this, and that's how this legislator learned so much about wireless. So people are starting to have a sense that something is wrong. They may know a little bit, but because mainstream media is censoring the good information, we're just so honored to present that. And a little further down the road, as people get their head around this, I have been so privileged to partner with some of the brightest minds, and one of them is Dr. Mikko Ahonen out of Finland. He's one of the scientific researchers, and he and I and some former colleagues, Brett and Lynn West, we just took it all and went, and we condensed it into an online course that can be taken for about the cost of a movie ticket, because we have to cover our overhead expenses, in about an hour online. So if you go to safertecheducation.org, you can literally take an off-the-shelf course today that can be used to train your entire school, your entire workforce, your entire municipality on their lunch hour.
Yeah, that's
And
awesome.
it kicks out, you can print out a handy tip sheet at the end. And then for those who are doing corporate compliance, it gives you a certificate of completion. And it's got like 10 little quiz questions throughout to make sure that you're capturing the most salient points. And it'll give you a quiz score, and you can go back and redo things. And, it's just kind of nice, because we don't train people, how can we possibly know that this even exists? Because it's invisible. So
Right. I would love for you to also mention that for healthcare practitioners, that
yes.
there is some course that they can take that used to be offered for credit.
Right.
And I'm mentioning that because it takes a lot to get a course available for CME credit at the
Yes.
time that it's put out. I know that ability has expired, but practitioners can still take the course for
Yes.
free. Could you just mention that as well?
Yes, it's the EMF Medical Conference 2021. And if you go to my website, on my resources page at Massachusetts for Safe Technology, I worked with Elizabeth Kelly, who was the executive director of this conference, and it took a couple of years to put this together. And I don't know of anybody else putting together an international conference right now, but everything that was presented in that conference is still just as highly relevant today. So I worked with Libby, and being a tech writer, I created a document that allows you to see what each one of the lectures are, each one of the panel discussions. And Dr. Magda Havis from Trent University, she did a pre-conference 4-session course that gives you the basics. What are EMFs?
Right.
And that's really good too, as a primer. And then you can go right into the conference and just pick and choose which lectures do you want to hear from. We've got scientists all over the world. So it's kind of cool. Just poke them into your calendar, because if we don't make it a priority, life fills in and everything slips by. So just Vimeo or YouTube, all those videos are available today at no charge. If you want to make a donation to her organization, that's always welcome, because we always have overhead things that we need to pay for, but no charge. We can all be professionally trained. Yeah.
Great. So, Cece, we need to wrap up. It's been such a great pleasure talking about this, and I really hope you continue to, forge ahead. And despite all of the barriers that keep presenting, please forge ahead and don't stop. We definitely have to make changes and to keep ourselves safer. And it's safe technology, not no technology.
Exactly.
That's really what's really important to hear here. So it's been a great pleasure talking to you about this really important topic. Thank you.
And my pleasure too. And hats off to you and all your colleagues. At the same time I figured out wireless is harmful, I was diagnosed with intestinal hypersensitivity, which we know is leaky gut. So I was up against both these huge things, and I had to figure it all out. But here I am today, perfectly healthy, happy. And I keep my bar very low. If I get to plant one seed today and help somebody, that's a great day. If we get big wins like that New Hampshire Commission report, that's pop the champagne at that point. But there's no cavalry coming. So we just have to keep educating one another and finding the courage to go against the mindset that mainstream media has cast on us, which is, as soon as you open your mouth and say, I think there's something wrong with wireless, we've all been conditioned to go tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist.
Right. I know. Yes.
So let's create these opportunities to present the true facts and let people decide for themselves. Don't take our word on any of it. But if anything I've done over the last decade can tee it up quickly for you to get to the bottom of it, join us at Massachusetts for Safe Technology and we'll teach you how.
Yeah, great. Thank you.